Hi, good morning. It's Max and Stephen here coming to you from the University of Oxford. We thought we'd start just by introducing ourselves and tell you a bit about our background before we begin. My name is Max. I'm a fifth year medical student here at the university. I have an interest in intensive care and in neurology. My research interests previously, though, have been slightly different. I've been mostly focused in the neurosciences, looking at decision making at the Nuffield Department of Clinical Neurosciences, and then how different brain regions interact and converse with each other at the Department of Physiology and Genetics. More recently, I've branched out into pharmacology to look at drug discovery and the drug development pipeline. That's at the Department of Chemistry. And of course, I'm also quite interested in paediatrics, which is one of the reasons I'm here today. So I'll now hand you over to Stephen to tell you a bit about himself.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name's Stephen Dierksmeier. I'm also a medical student here at the University of Oxford. And similarly, I also share a passion for paediatrics, but my research previously has also been in the neurosciences. So I've worked in the Department of Pharmacology, looking at the peripheral effects of spinal cord injury and looking for new drug targets which are more easily accessible. I've also got a passion for consciousness, which is something I've worked on previously, and an interest in teaching, and I'm currently teaching for experimental psychology. So that's everything we want to talk about for us, and now we're going to tell you a little bit more about the research that we're presenting today.
It's probably to understand this research more fully, it's best taking a step back to just explain our inspiration for starting this work. So it began when Steve and I were both on a placement some time ago in paediatrics at Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading. And to be honest with you, we had a really wonderful time on paediatrics, but we found some of the aspects of the peds placement really quite challenging. And in particular, that came from the really basic stuff. So for example, when mothers would ask us if we'd be able to help change a baby, undressing a baby, carrying a neonate, I think was particularly scary and difficult for us. When you're first on a ward and you've never really held a young child before, the idea of picking up a newborn is really rather daunting. And so we were chatting about this sometime later, wondering if our fears around some of the really basic aspects related to our lack of paediatric experience with young children in the community, i.e. part of our families or friends with younger children that we'd got to know. So that was kind of the inspiration behind what we did, because we were really enjoying paediatrics, but worried that we lacked some of these really basic skills. And so thought the best thing to do would be to conduct a little study to try and understand what was going on. And so we examined this problem using a comprehensive online questionnaire, the idea being that we would distribute it amongst the medical school and hope for responses through to understand what other people think about this issue. So that instead of it just being our own opinions, we get a little bit of data to explore the concept. And so we did that, aggregated our data, and you'll be able to see all of that shortly. But just in brief, our findings were that students without experience of children outside the clinical setting do struggle with infant care in their placement, and they do see this as a barrier to their ability to provide high quality care. And so we advise, both on our thoughts but also on some of the feedback that we had through the questionnaire, that dedicated teaching on infant handling and care would be able to significantly overcome this barrier.
Moving now to the questionnaire, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we designed this. We took advantage of everything moving online and designed this study online. And we split up our questionnaire into sort of three main sections. The first one was to find out a little bit of a background of the respondents, and we asked about the age, gender, year of study, number of younger siblings, as well as children, that includes own children, and paediatric experience. We then moved on and asked specifically about previous experience with infants, which we defined as under 1 year old, as one normally would, outside of the clinical area. So that includes having experience in the family, having younger siblings, but it could also be friends with younger children or through work. And we specifically asked about holding infants, washing, feeding, dressing and changing infants. Lastly, we moved on and examined the attitudes of the students towards infant care in the clinical settings with targeted questions. In total, we got 41 responses.
So the next step was to go and examine the responses that we received from our 41 respondents, and very quickly we identified two groups based on their previous experience with infants outside of the clinical setting. Those were participants that reported that they had very little experience, or that they had a medium to high amount of experience. And so we call these the low paediatric experience and the high paediatric experience groups. And we wanted to examine the demographics and features of those groups, which are reported here in this slide. So if you look at the top figure, you can see that the low and the high experience groups divide quite nicely in terms of their frequency of holding, dressing, changing, bathing and feeding infants, with the black bars representing the high experience group being much larger than the low experience group. Whereas if you look at gender, year of study and age, there's very little difference between these two subsets of our data. Interestingly, we do see a difference in the number of younger siblings associated with either the low or the high group, with the high group far more likely to have a younger sibling. So the average number of younger siblings was 0.96 with the high group and 0.44 with the low group.
So moving on to the third section of our questionnaire now. We asked the participants to rate whether they feel frightened or tense when handling infants in the clinical setting now. And we asked them to rate according to strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. And then we also asked students whether they feel comfortable changing or examining infants in front of the parents in a clinical setting. Using chi-squared analysis, we found a significant difference between the two groups, and we found that people with low previous experience outside the clinical settings felt significantly more frightened and tense when handling infants in the clinical setting. So it had a direct impact on how they felt on the wards with their previous experience. We also found that students with a lot of experience outside felt much more comfortable and significantly more comfortable examining infants on the ward.
So we were also really interested to find out not just if students reported that they felt tense when they were handling infants, but if they felt this was a barrier to their ability to provide care and really get the most out of their placement as well. So we asked students about this to let us know whether they felt that their lack of experience was a barrier to providing care on the ward. And you can see that the low experience group was significantly more likely to rate this problem as a barrier to their ability to provide care. And interestingly also, you'll see that the two groups divide into agree and disagree on average, indicating a very clear distinct difference between the two.
At the end, we asked whether students wanted to have some teaching on basic infant care, and there was quite an overwhelming response, with 95% of all students thinking that dedicated teaching on handling infants would improve their ability to provide care on the ward. And such teaching could include how to change a nappy so that students feel more comfortable examining and handling infants in the clinical setting. We also received feedback that such a session was trialled by Dr. Hussein in Reading, and that was generally very well received. And during this teaching, what he did was supervise students handling infants and teaching the proper way of handling, which gave students more confidence. Looking at our results and taking a step back of what we found here is a quite simple fix, we think, to a barrier to paediatric teaching and learning for students in their paediatric placement. Because obviously going into medical school, not everyone has the same background, but that background shouldn't be a barrier to your teaching and shouldn't make learning on the ward more difficult, because ultimately that is going to have an impact later on as well. So taking our results, we would advise, and we will be in touch with the university here as well, to introduce non-compulsory teaching on basic infant care. The reason for it being non-compulsory is that obviously with everyone having a different background, this might not apply to every student, but if students feel that it might be necessary and helpful, it should be provided. We would also advise that it is becoming more standardised, because across Oxford it is not standardised across the different hospitals that we have here. So for example, as we mentioned, Reading has trialled such teaching. However, we've not heard or any reports of any other students from different hospitals describing such teaching.
Yeah, just to concur with what Stephen said, I absolutely agree. I think there is a relatively straightforward fix for what is quite a difficult barrier for some individuals. So we can think about having very simple sessions of teaching which involve just the most basic things, such as how to pick up, hold, feed and dress an infant. And as long as that's led by an experienced healthcare professional, then I think those sessions can be hugely beneficial to mean that you're not scared and anxious when you go to the ward. And so just to wrap up this whole thing, I just wanted to say it's an absolute pleasure to present here, and we're very grateful to have this opportunity to come and speak at the conference today. Thank you so much.
I agree with Max. Thank you so much for having us today. It's been a real pleasure to be able to present here. And just to add as well, we are planning to follow up and see whether the teaching is going to be implemented and what effects that has on the attitudes of students towards infant care with a future study, and hopefully that will improve the access ultimately to paediatrics and broaden the interest in the student populations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.